Hello friends, welcome to CEC Live Lectures. Dear friends, today also we are going to talk in our series on 20th century world literature. Friends, today we are going to discuss on writing in Iraq and Middle East. And for the discussion we have with us once again in our studios Professor Anand Prakash. Professor Anand Prakash is a retired professor of English from Delhi University, and as I always say, we are always enlightened by his words because he shows us the way of life through his teachings. Friends, we know that you always wish that you could get more and more of knowledge and information. So we promise you to give you more and more of knowledge today also. So let's welcome our guest, Professor Anand Prakash, and let's carry forward the lecture. Hello, sir. Welcome to the lecture.
Thank you, Geetika, for your kind words, and welcome viewers. Good morning to all of you. Today's discussion is titled, as Geetika has said, Iraq Poetry and Middle East, Iraq Writing and Middle East, and it's a topic, that a bit difficult to assess, difficult in fact to get, because the kind of doldrums through which Iraq has been in past and the problems that it faced would not be conducive to literary writing. The devastation, you can't imagine, I can't imagine the kind of devastation that Iraq suffered in the last 20-30 years. I tell you that in the beginning of the 1980s, Iraq became a dictatorship. It was a, in some opinion, it was a benevolent dictatorship, in others rather cruel and insensitive. Whatever be the case, if you think of the Iraqi writer in the 1980s and later, you would realize that this was a country which gave a lot of credit to and importance to the writers. They had special privileges. The government would not only support them directly, but also through money and through facilities. That was Iraq, and I was surprised, that elsewhere writers are generally neglected, ignored, overlooked. Some people, treat them with contempt also, that they are wastrels. But in Iraq, writing was important in the 1980s. Then, something happened to Iraq. Dissensions were there inside Iraq. Dissensions were ethnic, they were religious. Saddam Hussein himself would not tolerate any opposition to his policies, even when the policies would be good for a large section of people in the country. And more serious than this was that there were possibilities of intervention in Iraq's social and political life from outside. And I have to name this country, US, which directly intervened in the affairs of Iraq in 1990. And this was a period, and I have to refer to this because this is also a concern of literature. This was a period when socialism in the world had a kind of setback. In Russia, which was Soviet Russia till then, changes occurred. It went capitalist. Socialism fell. And if Russia falls in the 1980s, late 1980s, then you can imagine the situation in the world. Russia was the other pole of political power. So the world was bipolar. So if something happened in the case of America, they committed some excesses here or there, then Russia would come forward and attack, would attack the policies and stances of America, and America would be kept under check. But with the fall of socialism in Russia in 1990, around that time, the world became unipolar, and that became very dangerous for the safety and security of the large number of countries as a whole. And one of the first victims of this kind of unipolarity was Iraq. Iraq was charged with by America, charged with keeping what is called WMD, weapons of mass destruction. And with this kind of a logic, American forces entered Iraq and they started searching for things. Of course, after 5, 6 years, 10 years, it was proved beyond doubt that there were no weapons of mass destruction. But by that time, Iraq had been devastated. It was attacked, with very powerful bombs by America. And America also mobilized opinion against Iraq from other countries. And we were under pressure. India was under pressure for supporting, U.S. intervention, and some people opposed, some people supported. All those things happened. Now, most of us, because this is just the other day that it happened, we have been watching, this kind of aggression against Iraq by great U.S. imperialist power. We had, at that time, TVs in our country showing bombing of Iraq on the screen, and suddenly you would see that bodies falling, on the road, and people started running helter skelter from this corner to that corner. Then we saw all these things, on the TV screen, and it became a kind of exhibitionism for the U.S. at that point of time. They were showing the world that they could teach a lesson to Iraq and any country which did not agree with them. I'm saying all this because this is the concern of the writer. This is the concern of the person who feels, who sympathizes with the agonies of the masses in general, who is happy when the masses are happy, who is unhappy when the masses are unhappy. And if this kind of devastation occurred, then of course no writer, because writer always has feelings, always has emotions, always has sensitivities, and when that happens, the writer doesn't have words to express this kind of pain, this kind of terror that happened just around them at that time. Things did not stop here. This was the period of George Bush first, and later on when the 2000 when this century became different, it was the 21st century, then another Iraq war happened, and that completely almost decimated Iraq. And one can't imagine, American forces had, their own centers of power in Iraq, and the worst thing that could happen to Iraq in 2000s, starting from I think 2000 onwards, was that the civil services, the administrative services, and the police forces, they were disbanded. So who will manage the country? If there are no officers, there are no bureaucrats to implement policies from above, and if there is no police force in the country, then who would control the country and the people who are hungry for destruction? So all kinds of hoodlums, all kinds of lumpens, all kinds of bad people, they started organizing private armies to attack the people, to loot the homes and all that, because of which people started doubting, suspecting everything and everybody. So this is what Iraq is, and I was reading about Iraq literature. An American scholar of all people, America has good people, America has bad people. I'm not against people at all. Some of the greatest writing has happened in America. So there is a lady in Columbia University, and she started doing research on Iraq writing. And I went, on the internet, I started searching for Iraq writing in the last 20-30 years. And she tells me through her writing that there is a book that she wrote. She tells us, that very little of Iraq literature is available in English translation. And maybe there is no press there at the moment, so people write and keep it to themselves. They cannot publish because there will be some kind of an information against them. And very little, she says, has come out through the filter. She uses the word filter, the filter of suspicion and filter of all those things. But then she is able to put together certain writers and certain book, certain excerpts and parts of the book, and she gave that book for publication, and that was published by Columbia University, I think 10-15 years ago. There are other informations also. Penguin has brought out some books of collections of short stories, etc. I don't have to talk about this writing, in that kind of a manner, that I'll give you a literary criticism of that. But I'm telling you that Iraq literature is supposed to capture and articulate a point of view and a feeling that is unthinkable for us. In a peaceful country like India, in the rest of the peaceful parts of the world. Americans were shocked, American citizens were shocked, British would be shocked. All over the world, people know that Iraqi writers, what would they write? So it is this kind of a world that Iraq faced, and I have to share this information with you Today also, some hope has occurred that there is an election, and in the election, the American supported person did not get enough votes. So there is some kind of a change, but the change is very little. That happened only the other day. I think about 6 months ago, the government changed, and everybody is keeping one's fingers crossed as to what's going to happen later, and why important powers in the world will not intervene further to check any kind of possibility of progress that Iraq might face, might make. So I start with this rather negative background against which Iraqi writing is to be seen, is to be recognized for its character, for its qualities, for its power. But then as we generally know that if times are bad, then writers come forward and they give us hope. How they give us hope is a process that is difficult to tell, difficult to clarify. But then even in the darkest of clouds, there is always a silver lining, and that silver lining occurs in the case of countries like Iraq. It comes from literature, comes from poetry, comes from short stories, comes from novels. So I give this short introduction, and then I'll in the second part of my lecture I'll also talk about another area which is equally problematic. I'll talk about Hebrew writing there, and that will come later. But at the moment, let's grapple with the nature and significance of Iraqi writing. So Iraq, in a way, starts as a very prosperous country, comparatively speaking, of course, in third world. In the 1980s, under a dictator called Saddam Hussein, and good for Iraq at that time, it is called Republic. Republic means that there will be rule of law, there will be constitution, and the people's voice would be heard there, and the people's aspirations would be somehow reflected in the thinking and in the policies of the country. That's what Republic means. So it's not a monarchy. It's not any kind of stage managed affair. People support, some people support more, some people support less, but then it's a republic in the 1980s. Now, see, Iraq is has that advantage of being surrounded by a large number of cultures. So they could have taken the a chance to learn from all these different cultures and evolve a comprehensive view of life. See, that I was just going through the information. So Iraq is bordered. It's a country which is in the Western Asia, bordered by Turkey to the north, Iran to the east, Kuwait to the southeast, Saudi Arabia to south, Jordan to the southwest, Syria to the west. So many cultures, so many ethnicities, so many languages, so many points of view. And Iraq was, the ancient Iraq was called Mesopotamia, and the new word is Iraq. And Mesopotamian culture, ancient culture, is known for its history, known for its richness at that point of time. So this is what Baghdad is, this is what Iraq is, and surrounded by different kinds of people. I wish that they were able to take advantage of this wealth of human knowledge and diversity, so that it would be one of the finest countries in the world. The largest city in Iraq is Baghdad. Official language is Arabic and Kurdish. Ancient times it was known as Mesopotamia. I already told you. The problems: it has religious tensions, even among Muslims. There are factions, and they look at one another with suspicion. There are sects, so there is sectarian clashes. It cannot be a stable democracy, because democracy requires that kind of tolerance, that kind of sense of harmony, which is there only when peace is there. And since there is no peace in Iraq, so democracy, there are chances of democracy coming in, but then going away. And then it is rather sad that imperialism, in the case of Iraq, supports dictators. It doesn't support people who want to disagree, and through disagreement they are able to make a consensus. So, for instance, as a dictator, Saddam Hussein would be as cruel can be in the 1980s, and because of which he was very unpopular in certain parts of the world. Then I referred to, I'll give you some details about this American researcher. She's a professor in the university at Columbia, and her name is Helen Benedict, and she is a literary researcher in America and says about Iraqi writing. So I am quoting her. I did discover a few books of prose and poetry that have managed to filter through the barriers of American suspicion and indifference, which means that there is all the time there is kind of censorship. So whatever you write, whatever you compose, whatever you communicate to other people in terms of literature, that thing is first screened, seen properly for what it is, what it says, and very little is able to come out of the territories of Iraq. The first contemporary Iraqi writing, says Helen Benedict, was a blog written by someone calling herself River Bend. You can't even announce your name. There is a person there, there is a woman there, and women, I think hats off to women that they have the courage to come forward and write. And this woman in Iraq, she assumed a name called River Bend, and it's a 24-year-old woman. So at 24, somebody can be so sensitive because she has seen the devastation all around, children dying of hunger, and violence all the time there. So River Bend describes how the quotidian, the daily life, grows increasingly more difficult in Baghdad as power outages multiply. There's no power there. There's no electricity there. People disappear. What does disappear mean? People generally die. People generally live. They move around. They shift from one place to another, and when they go away, finally they come back or they send a message. What is the meaning of disappear? Let me ask my friend here, what does this word disappear mean in today's context? People just disappear. Yesterday they were there and today they are not there, and nobody knows where they have gone. What would you say to this?
Sir, according to me, disappearance is the disappearance of thoughts, disappearance of physical presence. So, disappearance is in the context of the actual existence of a person in terms of what he is or what he was.
I am talking physical disappearance.
Physical disappearance.
They disappear and they don't come back.
It's the end of the life, nothing else.
End of the life, but you can't say the person died because there is no proof. This is a new phenomenon. I've heard about this phenomenon in my life for the first time in the last 5, 6 years. Otherwise, people always would, there was some information about them. But now they are not, yesterday they were there and today they are not there. So this is happening in Iraq, that people disappear, and this word is being used. And US disbanding of civil servants and police allows looters and kidnappers. Now they are on the prowl. People who loot wealth, loot money, take resources in their hands, kill others, with impunity. All this is happening because there is nobody to take action against them. So this is the kind of thing that is happening, as Helen Benedict says. She describes the increasing cynicism. I think cynicism is the result. You start losing hope. As somebody tells you, okay, let's work for the good tomorrow, and the cynic will say, what's the use? Nothing will happen. Things will remain the same, or they'll become bad. So cynicism is increasing in the country, and cynicism I equate with death. If human beings lose hope, if they despair all the time, if they don't have any faith in tomorrow, if they don't want to work, that thing, creates a condition of stasis. That creates a condition of lack of movement. And if there is no movement, then of course, how can human beings or humanity itself, for that matter, survive? So she described the increasing cynicism among Iraqis as the US, and this is an American citizen saying this, American scholar saying this, US puts in one puppet government after another. So people don't elect their own government. The government is supported by another power, and this person is put up. This person is in fact a slave. The puppet administrator or a ruler actually is a slave of somebody else who is not visible there. And in these conditions, the writing is happening. One can't say it is thriving. One can't say it's flowering. One can't say it's evolving. One can only say that with some difficulty it is happening, and people have problem regarding publication of this. Translation is a big issue. The Arabic is not known to people outside, and there are some translations needed, and because we are running a course on world literature, so for us it is very important that there should be languages through which literature written in different parts of the world is through which it is carried to the rest of us. So there is a writer in Iraq, and this writer is called Sinan Antoun, poet, novelist, filmmaker. Filmmaker is one very important aspect of creativity and communication, because sometimes when you don't have words to express, then you can show the picture, and the picture itself starts forming its own atmosphere in the mind of the watcher. His first novel is called I Jam, an Iraqi Rhapsody. See the weird title, I and then Jam, jam, whatever you call it, and then Iraqi Rhapsody. It can't be Rhapsody. Rhapsody is a happy account. Rhapsody is a kind of celebration. If you write something good about a phenomena or a country or a person, then you say, I am writing a rhapsody. The epics are rhapsodies because there you celebrate the races. So here the novel is called Iraqi Rhapsody, and one knows that if there is death all around Iraq, then how can be rhapsody there? It reads as much like a surrealist parable. What is surrealist parable? It doesn't mean anything directly. It doesn't talk about reality. It's a parable. Parable is a kind of an example. A story about, let's say, about birds. It's a kind of a folk tale. And through those parables, you try to connect with the reality. So there is a sparrow and there is a violent bird, and both of them are fighting, and the writer is showing this. Then obviously all of us know that the weaker bird perhaps is the masses, and the fiercer bird is perhaps the ruler. So it's that kind of a parable, and it's a surrealist parable. Surrealist means very intense and very difficult to understand. You mix things in such a manner that you can't get the meaning out of it. That is surrealism. If you have to show somebody angry, then you can, in surrealism, you can show the red head going in flames. Now, this doesn't happen in life, but then the writer imagines that the head, is giving out flames. So this is called surrealism. It reads as much like a surrealist parable as a satire. Either it's a parable or it's a satire. Satire means the person is so angry that one is all the time talking negatively. Dreamlike. Iraqi writing is dreamlike. It happens only, there is a big role of darkness in the dreams, and things disappear in the dream. They become something else than they were in the beginning. So this is a dreamlike situation. Things flow, they come to a sharp end, then something new begins. That new thing can come back to the original, or it may go elsewhere. This is what a dream is. So the writing itself is dreamlike in the case of Iraq. Chilling. You read and then you feel stunned, and then there is some kind of a thrill in one's body. One doesn't know what to do, what to think. That chilling effect is there when you read the writing. And ironic. You nod and you say no. You say yes and you say no, and you think that both the things are right. That is ironic. So something that is not meant is said, and vice versa. And then there is an example given here. A student who is thrown into a jail in a prison for no reason, where he is brutalized and subjected to an irrational set of interrogations. There is a student, he came to study in a school or college, but then he is taken one day by the police and he is kept in the prison, and there they subject him to interrogation. They ask 10 questions, then they ask 20 questions, they ask 100 questions. They don't allow him to sleep, and then they brutalize. And the word brutalize has lots of connotations. Maybe physical harm is done. Maybe the boy is molested also, physically speaking, sexually speaking. So all those things can happen in the jail. And this kind of a person, how can this person remain sane? So that story is there in this novel. The person is brutalized and subjected to an irrational set of interrogations straight out of Kafka. Kafka is a writer, all of us know, a German writer who was a modernist, and who talked about sadness, who talked about hopelessness and despair. And he would pile one detail upon another, and those details finally will become horrifying. That was Kafka's writing in the early 20th century, and he became a great writer for this reason, that the modern world is totally insensitive to the needs and requirements of the people, and the sensitivity increases. So that Kafka comes to mind when you read Iraqi writing today. And then his nightmares, dreams become nightmares. You don't want to dream, you want to come out of the dreams, you want to run away from the dreams, because they are nightmares, they are ghostly most of the time. And reality and nightmares, they converge, they become one. This is the kind of novel that this man Antun wrote. And then he also wrote poems, says Helen, and his favorite Helen's favorite poem, her favorite poem is the Baghdad Blues. That's a poem, and when the word blues is used, then of course that there are certain aspects of sadness and violence that would be depicted there. So I come to the end of the first part of the lecture, where I have talked about the background in which Iraqi writing has come up with a kind of vengeance. There was no issue for such a writing to emerge, but then it emerged, and then it raises questions. What questions it raises, and how it carries forward some kind of a message that we will take up in the second part of the lecture. Till then, please wait. Thank you.
Well, there's no thank you, sir. Thank you so much for giving us in this session. Friends, you are requested to be with us as we are back after a short break, and we will be continuing further. Till then, keep watching us. Thank you. Hello friends, welcome back to this session. Friends, as you know that today we are talking on writing in Iraq and Middle East. In the previous session we gave you the background and we started with a little of the writings, how the writings in Iraq took place. And friends, we would be carrying further and would be discussing more in today's lecture. And in this session specifically. Friends, for the discussion we have with us in our studios Professor Anant Prakash. Professor Anant Prakash is a retired professor of English, as well as he is an eminent writer and an author too. And through him, we always help you out in understanding different topics and issues in detail. So friends, be with us. We are going to give you more and more of knowledge. Now, I would like to welcome our guest, Professor Anant Prakash, once again. Hello, sir. Welcome to the lecture.
Thank you, and viewers, welcome back to the second part of the lecture. And in the first part, we covered the background aspect of Iraq literature and Iraq life. And in the second part, we will be getting more familiar with the writing which captures the state of emotions and experiences of a country through language. So, we were talking about the novel that was written by Antoon, and it was called I Jam Iraqi Rhapsody. And it was not rhapsody, it was not any happy account, it was a very unhappy account, and the words that were used by the critic, by the researcher, were that reality and nightmare, they converge. So reality becomes nightmarish, and nightmares, that Darauna thing, that horrifying thing, that appears real. So this is the kind of writing that is there in Iraq in the last 20 years or so, and that reflects very graphically the situation on the street and in the society in general. So from here we take another example of Iraq writing, and this time there is a writer who is a short story writer mainly, but also a filmmaker, and he composed his works in the 2000s. I think 2002 or 2003 he became active in the world of writing, and he wrote a collection of and now the collection is available in English translation. The collection is strangely called The Corpse Exhibition. Corpse means dead bodies. So there is an exhibition of dead bodies. That is what he's and when you read such a book, when you read such a collection of short stories, where most of the short stories, let me tell you the names of certain short stories, titles of the certain of a few short stories there. The first is Corpse Exhibition, the second is Killer and the Compass, the third is The Green Zone Rabbit, the fourth is An Army Newspaper, the fifth is Crosswords. This is the kind of titles that the writer has given to his short stories, and the comment about this particular book by a sensitive reader is this: it is part Kafka, that writer who is modernist, I talked about him in the previous lecture, part Orwell. You know Orwell, George Orwell, who was a critic of ideas that came from dictatorship, and who was a great democrat himself, and who projected, he used sometimes the form of science fiction, and he projected his imagination into the future, and he wrote certain novels which would become reality later on. So in the 1930s he would write a novel titled 1984, so 50 years later. So that kind of a writer, this writer that I am talking of, this Hassan Blassim, he is a combination of Kafka and Orwell. And then part magical realism. This also we have discussed, in fact, at length. There is a whole lecture devoted in our series to magic realism. And magic realism is that where things appear so different and so very odd, that you don't recognize them as real. But then that the point made is about our own life. So the writer takes lots of liberties with the ordinary details, and then makes some kind of a different picture from the same details that we know in life. That is magic realism. So that is also there in this book. The stories deal with not only the brutality and cruelty of men. This is the mainstay. This is the staple of Iraq writing: cruelty of men, the brutality, but with questions of how art and compassion can survive. Is it possible that art and compassion can survive in an atmosphere of violence? This is what is shown in the stories that come from Iraq. That you read about the stories, you read the stories, you read about the details, you convert them into a kind of vision in your own mind and start thinking about the human situation there. And then you realize that even though apparently there seems to be no hope, there must be hope somewhere, because after all somebody is imagining, somebody is putting pressure on one's imagination and is able to see, that things finally make sense to us. So that attempt at making sense of something where making sense is difficult, that is the essence of Iraq writing, and this should be always kept in mind. So even as they wrenched me from sympathy to horror, me means Helen Benedict, and she says from sympathy to horror. Initially she was sympathetic. She is sympathetic in the technical sense of the word, that you feel like any other person. The pathos, the feeling that is there in the other person, that becomes your feeling. That is what sympathy is. But then from there to horror, and when it turns into horror, then of course you know that the other person is horrified. Sympathy to horror, from reality to fantasy. Generally you come from fantasy to reality. In literature you see fantasy and then you start thinking about your own life. I start thinking about my own life. But here I think about my own life and then start fantasizing. The opposite starts happening. They left me, says the writer, enlightened. You read about Iraq and you become enlightened about certain things, moved and infuriated all at once. So it's a mix of different feelings when you read Iraqi fiction. I saw Blasim read from his book in New York. This person came from Iraq to America, and there he gave some lectures, and he's the writer of these stories that I'm talking about. And this person says that I saw him talk to the American audience in New York about Iraq war, he said, and his description of Iraq war and its impact on him and writers like him in Iraq was this, that Iraq is a giant mirror that has fallen, and when a mirror falls and shattered into million shards, million pieces, each one of us picks up one shard and thinks he sees the whole picture. See the violent image. Breaking of glass is not a very sound kind of a thing. So the breaking of glass means it has so many different parts and each part is deadly. And you pick up one part and you start looking at it, and what do you think? You think of Iraq life, you think of Iraq culture. And he says he's writing these stories that he published then. He's writing these stories just picking up those sharp pieces of glass and thinking that that's the whole Iraq. But then there is another piece, and that piece is sharp in a different manner. That also is Iraq. Then there is a third piece, and if there are 14, 15 stories, then this person would say, Blasim, that all these stories are different pieces from the same mirror which was once Iraq. So just see how the whole thing is presented in the book. Iraq was a shining example of culture, a shining example of prosperity, a shining example of cause and the espousal of the cause. And so something happened in the last 20 years, says he, and then there's no more Iraq. It is totally disintegrated and it has gone into different pieces. It stands completely divided at the core. So this is the kind of image that the thing leaves on us, for us. So each one of the pieces is picked up and thinks, all of us think that it is the whole picture. It is not the whole picture. So that is what the idea about Iraqi, the first the novel, then the short stories. And the third example I give from Iraq writing is about a poem, about certain poems. So one poem, The Heart of a Woman by Latif Helmet, draws a moving picture of a woman's heart as an open country. In the poem, the woman's heart is shown as open heart, and then that becomes the thing called the country. That has no need for weapons, borders, passports or war. In a poem, this is what is being said, that a woman's heart is shown and the woman's heart is open, and it is completely unprotected. Iraq doesn't have weapons of its own, Iraq cannot defend itself. Iraq cannot secure a safe existence there. Another poem, according to her, is called The Prey, P-R-E-Y, by Adil Abdullah. It talks of the vulture of war. First, war itself is very damning, and then it's a further, called vulture. So, vulture is a violent animal, a violent bird, and when this word is descriptive of, the word is symbolical of the kind of thing that is going on in Iraq at the time, then you can see that this is violence further compounded. So, The Prey by Adil Abdullah talks of the vulture of war feeding upon the flesh of what turns out to be its own children. It's very difficult to imagine even that the mother would start eating her own children. But this is what is happening in Iraq, and this is what the poet is saying, that Iraq is not able to feed its children, to feed its citizens, to feed its men and women, people who give happiness, who create circumstances of peace. That is not happening. You are born in Iraq, one is born in Iraq, and then Iraq starts killing him or her. That is what Iraq is, and that is how it is visualized by the poets at that point of time. Not all the poems in the collection are directly about war. There are many poems where war is not directly referred to, but they are filled with the passion that is both tragic and inspiring, because after all the poet is angry, and anger is a very good emotion. It's very difficult to be angry in such circumstances. Most of the time when there is danger, when there is violence, when there is suppression, then people become desperate, and out of desperation then finally they are depressed. They say nothing is possible. But no, in the poems you have violence, but you also have anger and passion. And because there is passion, then you start realizing that somebody could be passionate about this. Somebody could use symbols and metaphors in order to express it with power. That shows that there is hope somewhere, that people are exerting extra in order to visualize what is happening in Iraq at the time. So, if your imagination is excited, if your thinking is expanded in scope, then it will take in all the parts of experience and will try to integrate those parts into some kind of a whole. So, not all the poems in the collection are directly about war, but they are filled with a passion that is both tragic and inspiring. In fact, that's the correct understanding of tragedy. Tragedy doesn't depress. Tragedy compels us to think more. Agony is never depressing, because agony all the time keeps you alive. In fact, that's the difference between pathos and tragedy. So, the word tragedy is used very carefully by the critic here. Even as they ask, as a poet does here, and then there is a quote in the poem, how can you extract poems and sharp pieces of a weapon from your chest at the same time? In the chest, either there are poems or there are some weapons. If both are there found in the chest, then it is something else. It's a weird kind of an experience. So, the collection of poems that I am referring to is titled Flowers of Flame. It's very difficult to visualize once again that flame is looking like flowers and vice versa. But this is what Iraq poetry is. So, to sum up Iraqi writing as a writing which is a product of instability, violence and disturbance, and that writers are talking about it, writers are engaging with this reality, shows that tomorrow is going to be different. Tomorrow these writers will give rise to certain passions and certain ways of understanding things, that things would start moving towards the normal. This is the feeling of Iraqi writing at the core. It's a humanist writing, it's a writing about terror and horror, but then terror and horror can be interpreted only by the human mind in its right proportion. So, I conclude this part of the lecture with a comment on Iraqi writing, that it's full of pain, it's full of realism. It at the moment appears not to be understood easily, but then since people are engaged with the difficulty of feeling and articulating this emotion, so someday the hopeful atmosphere will emerge. So, I finish my discussion on Iraqi writing with a quotation from the short story, the corpse exhibition, and the first two sentences. And you can see from the two sentences as to what the writer will be saying later. Before taking out his knife, he said, after studying the client's file, you must submit a brief note on how you propose to kill your first client. A knife is given and you are supposed to kill a client, and then the method is given. And how you will display his body in the city after killing. But that does not mean that what you propose in your note will be approved. So, I am giving you a weapon, you go and kill somebody. I am also telling you how that body is to be shown on the street, and then I will tell you whether you are wrong or right. One does not know what to do. So, this is the kind of story, and this goes on and on, as I have been telling earlier, that this kind of a writing does not end anywhere. It's we are moved in circles, and every circle is worse than the previous one. But still, there is a kind of hope, there is a kind of concern for the difficulty that Iraqi people are facing, and certainly out of this kind of literature, a ray of that will enlighten us, that ray will finally emerge and will lead us somewhere. So, on this note of difficult inspiration, I end this discussion and take another part of Middle East experience, and that experience is well, it has a history of its own. I am talking about Hebrew writing, and Hebrew was a language of the Jews, and the Jews had no home ever in their history till the other day, till 1948, when Israel came into being, and till that time they were what is called gypsies or Khanabadosh. They would be there in all countries. They would be working in trade, they would be in education, they would be in philosophy, they would be in thought, they would be in science. And a large number of geniuses actually were born in Jewish families. All of us know that. I do not have to go into this. But then this particular community of the Jews never had a home. They were pushed out of their home in the ancient period. Then they start moving from one place to another, and they were in search of a home. So, what does home mean? Home is a sense of belonging. So, there is a community. It is a very talented community. It is a community of great writers and thinkers, but this community does not have a home. A home to call its own. What is a home, by the way, in today's context? And when we writers, when we poets, when we talk about poetry and writing, we are all the time thinking of some kind of a place to which we can belong. But here there is a whole community, and it goes through the horror of not having a home. So, that is what and finally, they needed two things: one, a home, a nation, a country, and the second thing, that they would have a language. And somehow they had no language. They were speaking whatever language the country had where they settled down. So, if they settled down in England, they would speak English. If they were in Germany, they would speak German. If they were in France, they would speak France. Which is their language? Their original language was Hebrew, but Hebrew had become a dead and defunct language, even though it was showing its presence once or twice in history over centuries. But then, as a kind of rising phenomena, evolving phenomena, it was not there. So, this is a difficult question to raise, but then I thought that in the Middle East there is a country, there is a community, that there is a group of people which always has been thinking about finding a home, finding an identity, and then only in the 20th century and in very difficult circumstances, when nobody understands them and they do not also understand anyone, when there is a kind of mutual suspicion from all sides, and it's a community that is involved in a large number of controversies and wrong and right policies, but then they have a literature, they have a home in Israel, they write in Hebrew, and Hebrew has been developed in the last 50, 60 or more years into a full-fledged language. This is a welcome sign that there is a language which has been taken from the ashes, and new experiences are being expressed through this language in people who now live in Israel, which they call their home. So, I thought we would have a view of what kind of writing the Israelis are doing, and whether they have faith in two things. One, their language, and secondly, their experiences. So, I will give you a brief view of this in this lecture in the next 5-10 minutes, and tell you that this is one variant of cultural kind in the Middle East. I start with 2 or 3 views in brief, and revival of a language and its cultivation were essential elements of Jewish enlightenment. The Jews, had a language initially, and they had to evolve it further, which arose in Europe in the mid 18th century. The process began then. In the mid 18th century, they became aware of their own language, and they started collecting, bits and pieces from one place and another, and they started studying it so that they could imbibe the very sense of language that they had been used since time immemorial. And later, the Zionist movement. Zionist movement was the movement about creating a nationality of the Jews themselves. Now, politically, ideologically speaking, this doesn't appeal much to the modern people. Many Jews, intellectuals, would themselves not contribute to this kind of an idea in positive terms. But then there is a movement which is a nationalist movement, and nationalism has lots of problems, but then they were pursuing it at that time. It arose at the end of the 19th century and campaigned for a national home for the Jews in Palestine. Between antiquity and modern times, Hebrew, a sacred language reserved for liturgy and poetry, it was not a vernacular language. It was not spoken in day-to-day use. If you have a language of your own, then perhaps it will give you an idea about what you are and what you want. Would you agree with this? There are 2 views on this. One is that I must have a language to express myself. The second is that I have a language in which I express generally. If I am in India, I speak an Indian language. If I am elsewhere, I speak another language. So, that is my language. This is a simple answer. But then, with this language that you speak on the road, can you identify? I can identify. I think others can identify. But if somebody has an idea of a culture which is very ancient and wants to go back there and show oneself as different from others, then there will be a problem. And this problem, the Jews and Hebrew, their language, have faced. I'll take a few minutes telling you about Hebrew literature and the Hebrew language. They play an important role in shaping the Israeli Jewish identity. Can we have an identity called Israeli identity? Israel has a connection through trade with the rest of the world. There are industrialists who are Jews, there are traders who are Jews, there are writers who are Jews, there are scientists who are Jews, and their identity will be Jewish identity or scientist identity, Jewish identity or a trader's identity. These are the questions I am raising, and there are no easy answers to this. But then this is the kind of situation in which Jews have found themselves after particularly they found a home. And the home is threatened from all sides even today, because people have not taken kindly to this kind of a evolution in the 20th century. I read 2 short stories by Hebrew writers, both of them young and both of them women, and I wanted to find out as to what exactly they think about the society in which they live in Israel. And I realized that they were as much like us. Those women were facing the same problem that all of us face, but they were using Jewish language, they were using Hebrew, and that Hebrew would have given them the kind of confidence that perhaps other languages could not give. Maybe that's the reason. So, I keep my mind open and I tell you about these 2 short stories that I read. First is by Leigh Annie, a young writer. She is in her 50s, and the title of the short story is White. And there is a young woman who goes to a tailor to get a suit made for a child whom she is accompanying. Now, the only part that is Jewish in this situation is that she wants a suit for the child. Generally, children are not wearing suits, but if they wear a suit at the age of 13, then it means there is a ritual among the Jews, and that ritual is that at the age of 13, the child will be treated as a man. So, on that particular day, it's a special day. So, the child will become a man and he must wear a suit. Anyway, that is on the sides, but then she goes to a tailor and she wants to get the suit made. Now, there are very strange situations here. The child, later on we find out, is not her son, but the tailor thinks it's her son. The tailor says, give me all the money and I'll stitch the suit. And she says, I don't have the money, but I'll give you the money on the day you give me the suit. So, there is a kind of a discussion, and then I think they are friends. It's indicated in the story that the tailor and the woman were also friends. They recognized each other, they knew each other, they had not interacted much, and then then the deed is struck between them. Some money is passed, is given, and then the person is friendly and he wants to take advantage of the woman, and the woman says, okay, I'll give you the advantage, and that will be taken as money. So, the situation is a bit tortuous, but if a woman is writing like this, and towards the end, he makes a suit, but the woman doesn't come to collect it, and then she says, keep the suit with you. And he says, what do I do with the suit? He says, you sell it. He said, but why don't you take the suit? And the woman says, that child is dead. So, this situation, you see, the story gives jerks. The story talks about certain rituals. The story talks about man-woman relationship. The woman is very outgoing. She wants to pay, but she cannot pay. So, she would say, okay, now I can give money later, but you can love me. And that kind of situation which is very modern. So, and the suit had a white color, and the white color has so many associations. Therefore, I thought that the story was very lively. It was very it raised questions, but then it is our story. This is a story that is there for all of us. So, I would suggest that through Jewish language, through Hebrew language, through this experience, the subject is finally integrating with the rest of the world. The same situation. It's a child growing up. It's two human beings getting together. They are friends. They also get intimate. But there's nothing wrong or right there. It's a question of their personal choice. The second story is somewhat. I'll cut on this, but I will say in the second story, there is a businesswoman and her husband, and they are not feeling very stable at a place where they live. This could be a kind of a story that will tell us. It's a kind of a parable in the sense that you sell things and you don't feel stable. But once again, it's a story about capitalism. It's a story about trade, and once again, it's a woman who is writing it. And the end is that the last sentence is that deep down below, everything was black, with only bit of white foam on the water here and there. So, they are just next to a river, and where the home is rocking, it is shaking, and it might fall any time. So, they move out of it. So, maybe they are talking about the world. So, I think with this kind of an experience, the question that is raised in this is that identity is important, but identity is not all. What is more important than identity is the integration of different identities into a kind of meaningful whole that we have. So, we have covered two things today, one the Iraqi writing and then the Hebrew writing, and in both these writings we find that hopefulness has to be bought through intense agony that one has to go through. So, that is where I would like to finish on a point of hopefulness, and thank you, and thanks Geetika for this occasion.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much for giving us this session. Friends, if you have any questions or feedback for this lecture, then do write to us at info.cec@nic.in. We are going to meet again soon. Till then, take care. Goodbye. Thank you, sir. Thank you once again.